Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. Rose had been awake for 36 hours straight, and her eyeballs felt like they'd been rolled in sand, deep-fried, and then reinstalled backwards. The samples from moon designation G448 weren't going to catalog themselves, unfortunately, and the automated systems had decided, with the typical perversity of all technology everywhere, to malfunction precisely when she needed them most. So she'd done it manually. All of it. Thousands of mineral samples, biological specimens, and atmospheric readings, each one logged, cross-referenced, and filed according to the incomprehensible organizational system preferred by the Galactic Research Consortium. The Galactic Research Consortium, Rose had learned during her 3 years aboard the multi-species vessel Distant Horizon, was apparently run by beings who had never heard of the concept user-friendly. They probably considered it a weakness. Now, though, she was done. Finished. Complete. And she was going to take a nap if it killed her, which, given her current level of exhaustion, seemed distinctly possible. The communal rest area on Deck 9 was blessedly empty when she arrived. The Distant Horizon housed representatives from 18 different species, each with their own sleep cycles, rest requirements, and ideas about what constituted acceptable ambient noise. Humans, as it turned out, were somewhere in the middle of the pack when it came to sleep needs, though they were apparently weird for doing it all in one go. The Orthani meditated in 15-minute intervals throughout their day cycle. The Delathi submerged themselves in specialized tanks for 3 hours every 20. The Moltari? Well, the Moltari were going to become relevant very shortly, though Rose didn't know it yet. She collapsed into one of the rest pods designed for medium-sized bipeds, which was a fancy way of saying it fit humans, Moltari, and about 6 other species reasonably well. The pod enveloped her in a cocoon of climate-controlled comfort, the gel padding molding to her body like a hug from a very considerate piece of furniture. Rose closed her eyes, let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere around her ankles, and felt consciousness beginning to slip away like a thief in the night. Blissful darkness, silence, peace. The gentle hum of the ship's engines, distant and soothing. She was asleep in 30 seconds flat, which meant she was asleep when the 2 Moltari cubs noticed her. Rin and Nimbus had been playing in the corridor outside the rest area, a game that involved a magnetic ball and rules that changed every 15 seconds, when Nimbus spotted the human through the transparent sections of the rest area's door. Nimbus, being the more cautious of the two, suggested they keep playing. Rin, being Rin, immediately pressed their face against the door for a better look. "The human is sick," Rin announced with the absolute certainty possessed only by the very young and the very stupid. "How do you know?" Nimbus asked, though they were already moving closer to the door, curiosity winning out over caution as it so often did. "Look at her. Eyes closed, not moving, barely breathing, obviously sick." Rin's tail, thick and otter-like, covered in dense brown fur, swished with agitation. "We have to help." Now, if someone had bothered to explain Moltari cultural practices to the human crew in any meaningful detail, this situation might have been avoided. But the Moltaria information packet provided to new human personnel was approximately 6,000 pages long, written in the kind of formal galactic standard that made legal documents look breezy, and most humans, Rose included, had skimmed it, nodded wisely, and promptly forgotten everything except "they like fish" and "don't touch their whiskers without permission." Buried on page 4308 was a passage explaining that when a Moltari appeared ill or distressed, The appropriate response was to bring them gifts to anchor their spirit to the physical world and remind them of the beauty of existence. The human crew had missed this. Rose was about to pay the price. Rin and Nimbus scurried off with purpose, their small, clawed feet clicking against the deck plating. The rest area's door was unlocked. It was communal space, after all. And they slipped inside with the stealth of creatures who'd spent their entire short lives getting into places they shouldn't be. Rose, deep in the kind of sleep that usually required a crowbar to escape, didn't stir. The cubs approached the rest pod slowly, reverently, as if Rose were a religious artifact rather than a very tired xenobiologist who just wanted 4 hours of unconsciousness. Rin reached into the small pouch they wore around their neck. Moltari clothing was minimal, mostly pouches and harnesses, and withdrew 3 smooth stones they'd collected from various parts of the ship. One was from the observation deck, worn smooth by countless paws and feet. One was from the engine room, still faintly warm from proximity to the reactor core. The third was from outside the galley, and had been kicked around like a soccer ball by various crew members until Rin had rescued it. With great care, Rin placed all 3 stones on Rose's stomach. She didn't wake up. This was partly because the stones were light, and partly because Rose's exhaustion had achieved a density that could probably be measured by scientific instruments. The cubs settled down to wait, sitting on their haunches with their tails curled around their feet, watching Rose with the kind of intense focus usually reserved for predators stalking prey. Minutes passed. Rose's breathing remained slow and steady. Her eyes stayed closed. "She's not better," Nimbus whispered, their voice high and worried. "The stones need time to work," Rin insisted, but there was doubt creeping into their tone. More minutes. Rose shifted slightly in her sleep, and the movement dislodged one of the stones, which rolled off her stomach and onto the floor with a soft clatter. Both cubs gasped. "It's worse than we thought," Rin said, standing up abruptly. "We need more gifts. Better gifts. Nimbus, go find Ondo. I'll get blankets." And just like that, the situation escalated from mildly inconvenient to about to become Rose's problem. Rose, blissfully unaware, dreamed of a beach she'd visited as a child, where the waves had been gentle and the sky had been the kind of blue that didn't exist anywhere else in the galaxy. In the dream, she was building a sandcastle, and it was perfect, and nothing was on fire or malfunctioning or requiring her immediate attention. It was the best dream she'd had in months. She was about to wake up, and it was going to be weird. The first thing Rose became aware of was weight. Not much, just enough to register through the fog of sleep as vaguely wrong. The second thing was warmth on her face. Not the comfortable warmth of the rest pod, but the concentrated warmth of someone breathing very close to her. She cracked one eye open. 2 enormous eyes stared back at her, approximately 6 inches from her face. They were dark and round, and belonged to a creature covered in dense fur that ranged from cream on the face to chocolate brown on the ears. Whiskers twitched. A small nose wiggled. Rose's brain, still booting up from deep sleep, took a moment to identify the creature as Rin, one of the Moltarii cubs who lived on the ship. She'd seen them around, usually causing minor chaos in the science labs, or racing through corridors at speeds that seemed inadvisable for creatures with that many moving parts. "Ah," Rose said eloquently. "Hi?" Rin's face split into a smile that showed all their teeth, small, pointed, and numerous. "You're awake. Are you feeling better? We brought you gifts." Rose's still foggy brain processed this information slowly. Gifts? She tried to sit up and discovered the source of the weight. 3 smooth stones resting on her stomach. She stared at them, then at Rin, then at the second cub, Nimbus, her brain supplied, who was watching her with equal intensity from the foot of the rest pod. "That's very kind," Rose managed, because her parents had raised her to be polite even when confused. "Thank you." The cub's expressions transformed from concern to pure joy, and Rose felt a brief moment of satisfaction at having apparently said the right thing. She carefully picked up the stones, examined them with what she hoped looked like appropriate appreciation, and set them aside on the pod's small side table. "These are lovely," she said, meaning it. They were nice stones, actually, smooth and pleasant to hold. "But I'm okay, really. I was just sleeping." Rin and Nimbus exchanged glances, and Rose saw something flicker between them that she couldn't quite interpret. If she'd been more awake, she might have recognized it as the look of creatures who believed they knew better than the patient about the patient's own condition. "Just sleeping," Rin repeated slowly, as if testing the words. "Yes, humans need sleep. It's normal. I'm fine." Rose stretched, her spine making concerning popping sounds that were also, unfortunately, normal. "Really? Thank you for checking on me, but—" "She's being brave," Nimbus whispered to Rin, loudly enough that Rose absolutely heard it. "Trying not to worry us." "Very brave," Rin agreed solemnly. "We should get more gifts." "No, wait," Rose started, but the cubs were already moving, scampering out of the rest area with purpose. Rose sat there for a moment, stones in hand, trying to figure out what had just happened. She was a xenobiologist. She'd spent years studying alien life forms. She had 3 degrees and a certification in cross-cultural communication. Surely she could handle 2 well-meaning cubs. She settled back into the rest pod, placed the stones carefully back on the side table, and closed her eyes. Maybe they'd forget about her. Maybe they'd get distracted. Cubs had short attention spans, right? That was probably universal. It was a nice thought. It was completely wrong. But it was nice. Rose drifted back toward sleep, unaware that Rin and Nimbus had not only not forgotten about her, but had decided she required urgent intervention. Unaware that she was about to become the center of a ship-wide incident involving multiple departments, at least 1 stolen specimen, and enough thermal blankets to insulate a small moon. Unaware that her simple nap had just become extremely complicated. The universe, as Rose was about to learn, had a sense of humor. It wasn't a particularly kind sense of humor, but it was definitely present. She managed approximately 11 more minutes of sleep before things got really interesting. The second time Rose woke up, she couldn't breathe. Well, that wasn't entirely accurate. She could breathe, technically, but it required significant effort because she was buried under what felt like the collective weight of a small star. She flailed, panic setting in before her brain caught up with the situation and managed to extract 1 arm from the crushing mass of blankets. She was buried under blankets. Rose counted them as she fought her way to the surface like a very confused, very sweaty salmon. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6 thermal blankets, each designed to retain heat in environments that would make a polar explorer weep, now piled on top of her in a rest area that was already climate-controlled to a comfortable 22 degrees. She was sweating, profusely. Her hair was plastered to her forehead, and her uniform was doing that thing where it stuck to her back, in a way that made her want to peel her own skin off. "What?" Rose said to nobody in particular. "In the actual—" "Oh, good! You're awake again!" Rose's head whipped around, too fast. The room spun a little, and she found herself looking at Ondo, an adult Moltari who worked in engineering. He was nearly twice the size of the cubs, his fur a distinguished silver gray, and he was regarding her with the kind of earnest concern usually reserved for dying royalty. Behind him, looking extremely pleased with themselves, were Rin and Nimbus. "We brought blankets," Rin announced proudly. "Ondo helped." "I did indeed," Ondo said, nodding sagely. "The cubs came to me in great distress, explaining that the human Rose was suffering from a mysterious ailment. Upon investigation, I discovered you were experiencing significant heat loss, a dangerous condition for humans, given your species' poor thermoregulation." Rose opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I don't have poor thermoregulation. Humans are actually pretty good at—" "6 blankets should be sufficient," Ondo continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "Though if you continue to show symptoms, we may need to increase to 8, possibly 10. "I will die," Rose said flatly. "I will actually die of heat stroke before we reach 10 blankets." Ondo's ears swiveled forward with interest. "Heat stroke? Is that another human ailment? Should I add it to the list?" "There's a list?" "I've started documenting your condition," Ondo explained, pulling out a data pad from his harness. "Temperature dysregulation, periodic unconsciousness, inability to recognize severity of own symptoms, classic signs of decline." Rose stared at him, then at the cubs, who were nodding along like this made perfect sense. Then back at Ondo. "I was sleeping," she said slowly, enunciating each word. "Sleeping. Humans do it every day. It's normal. It's required. It's not an illness. It's basic biology." Ondo made a note on his data pad. "Confusion and disorientation," adding to the list. Rose briefly considered screaming into one of the thermal blankets, but decided that would probably just convince them she was having a breakdown. Instead, she began extracting herself from the blanket mountain, peeling away layer after layer of well-meaning suffocation. "Look," she said, trying for patient and landing somewhere around mildly hysterical. "I appreciate the concern, I really do, but I'm fine. I just needed a nap. Past tense. Needed. I don't need 6 blankets. I don't need gifts. I need—" She was interrupted by the sound of tiny claws on deck plating, moving fast. Rin had returned, and they were holding something. No, they were holding a terrarium. A familiar terrarium. Rose's blood, which had been uncomfortably warm from the blankets, suddenly ran cold. "Is that," she said carefully, "specimen 42G from the xenobiology lab?" "We brought you a companion," Nimbus chirped, bouncing on their feet. "Warm-blooded creatures help with healing." Rose looked at the terrarium. Inside, a small reptilian creature with far too many eyes and scales that shimmered with iridescent patterns stared back at her with an ORD expression that clearly said, "I don't know how I got here either, and I'm not happy about it." The creature, which Rose had privately nicknamed Mr. Scales during the cataloging process, though she'd never admit it out loud, was definitely, absolutely, 100% supposed to be in the secure xenobiology lab, the lab with locked doors and access codes and a security system that was supposed to prevent exactly this kind of thing. "How?" Rose asked, her voice remarkably calm given the circumstances. "Did you get into the xenobiology lab?" Rin and Nimbus exchanged glances. "The door was locked," Rin admitted. "So we borrowed Technician Yumiko's access card while she wasn't looking," Nimbus finished. "You stole—" Rose stopped, took a breath, tried again. "You can't just take specimens from the lab. That's a containment breach. That's a security incident. That's going to get me fired." "But he'll help you feel better," Rin insisted, holding up the terrarium like an offering. "He's warm and scaly and very confused, which means he needs comfort too. You can comfort each other." Mr. Scales chose that moment to make a sound like a rusty hinge mixed with a deflating balloon. Rose had never heard him make that sound before. She made a mental note to add it to his behavioral profile, assuming she still had access to the lab after this disaster. "Ondo," Rose said, turning to the adult Moltari with what she hoped was a reasonable expression. "Please explain to the cubs that they can't just liberate specimens from secured areas." Ondo considered this. The cubs acted from a place of compassion and cultural obligation. In Moltari tradition, when one is unwell, the community provides comfort through gifts and companionship. They were following proper protocol for, "I'm not unwell." Rose's voice rose higher than she intended. "I'm tired. There's a difference." "Exhaustion is a precursor to many serious conditions," Ondo said gently, making another note. "Your denial of symptoms is concerning." Rose wondered if it was possible to die from sheer frustration. It seemed unlikely, but the galaxy was full of surprises. Before she could formulate a response that wouldn't involve swearing in 3 languages, the rest area door slid open with a soft hiss. Rose had never been so happy to see another human in her life. Rook stood in the doorway, took in the scene. Rose surrounded by blankets, the cubs holding a terrarium, Ondo taking notes, and his face transformed. It was the smile of someone witnessing something so absurd, so perfectly ridiculous, that they would remember it for the rest of their natural life. "Don't," Rose warned. Rook pulled out his personal recording device. "Don't you dare." "This is going in the crew newsletter," Rook said, already recording. "Possibly the Galactic Archives. Rose, are you being aggressively helped to death by otter children?" "I hate you," Rose said without heat. "I hate you so much. Is that specimen 42G? Yes. Did they steal it from the lab? Yes. Is Dr. Yoon aware? Not yet, but she will be. And then I will be dead." Rook's grin widened. "This is the best day of my life." Before Rose could respond, possibly by throwing a thermal blanket at his head, the door opened again. This time it was Krill, one of the Orthani security officers, their mantis-like body folding through the doorway with the fluid grace of a nightmare made of chitin and judgment. Krill's compound eyes surveyed the scene. Their antennae twitched. When they spoke, their voice had the quality of someone reading from a very boring manual while simultaneously planning violence. "I have received reports of a biological containment breach on Deck 9. Explain." Rose looked at the terrarium, at the cubs, who were now trying to hide behind Ondo, at Rook, who was still recording and making absolutely no effort to help, at the 6 thermal blankets that represented the road to her current hell. "It's complicated," she said. Krill's antennae twitched again. In the 3 years Rose had known them, she'd learned that antenna twitches were the Orthony equivalent of deeply skeptical eyebrow raises. "Uncomplicate it," Krill said. Mr. Scales made his rusty hinge balloon sound again. Rose closed her eyes and wondered if she could go back to sleep and wake up in a different timeline. The thing about Krill, and Rose had learned this during a particularly memorable incident involving unauthorized plasma experiments, was that they possessed absolutely zero tolerance for nonsense. The Orthani species had evolved on a world where ambiguity meant death, and they'd carried that philosophy into space with the zealotry of converts. Everything was binary. Rules existed or they didn't. Violations occurred or they didn't. There was no gray area in Krill's world, which made the current situation something of a problem, given that it was nothing but gray area. "The cubs were trying to help," Rose began, then stopped because Krill's antennae had tilted in a way that suggested this explanation was insufficient. Help with what, precisely? They thought I was sick. Were you sick? No, I was sleeping. Krill's head rotated 15 degrees to the left. A gesture Rose had learned meant they were processing information that didn't quite compute. Sleeping is a normal biological function for humans. I know that. You know that. The cubs didn't know that. Why not? Rose opened her mouth, closed it, and realized she didn't actually have a good answer. Why hadn't anyone explained human sleep patterns to the Moltarii contingent? Why wasn't that in the standard orientation materials? Why was the galaxy's premier research vessel apparently run on the principle of let's just hope everyone figures it out? Cultural miscommunication, Ando offered helpfully. The cubs observed Rose in a state that, to Moltari perception, indicated distress. They responded according to our traditions. By stealing a secured biological specimen, Krill stated. Not a question. A fact. Rin and Nimbus had gone very still behind Ando, their earlier enthusiasm evaporating in the face of Krill's complete immunity to cuteness. Rose felt a stab of sympathy for them despite everything. They'd been trying to help, after all. They'd just been catastrophically wrong about what kind of help was needed. Look, Rose said, standing up and immediately regretting it as the blood rushed from her head. She swayed, caught herself on the edge of the rest pod, and heard Ando make a concerned noise. Nobody's hurt. Mr. Scales, Specimen 42G, is fine. I'll return him to the lab personally. We can avoid involving Dr. Yoon entirely. Mr. Scales? Rook asked, still recording like the terrible friend he was. I don't want to talk about it. You nicknamed the specimen. I said I don't want to talk about it. Krill's antennae swiveled to focus on the terrarium. Dr. Yoon filed a containment breach report approximately 8 minutes ago. The specimen's absence has been noted. Security protocols require a full investigation. Rose's stomach dropped somewhere around her knees. Dr. Yoon was her supervisor, a brilliant xenobiologist from a colony world where they took regulations very, very seriously. She was also the person who wrote Rose's performance reviews, approved her research proposals, and generally held Rose's entire career in her very organized, very strict hands. Can we maybe, Rose tried, explain this as a clerical error, a miscommunication, an act of nature beyond anyone's control? Lying in an official report is a violation of Regulation 44, Section 12, subsection. Okay, never mind. Bad idea. Forget I said anything. Rook lowered his recording device long enough to look thoughtful. What if Rose pretends to be cured by the gifts? The cubs think they saved her. Everyone's happy. We return the lizard. Case closed. Rose turned to stare at him. That's your solution? Lie to children? Cubs, Ando corrected. And I must say, it's not the worst idea. If Rose acknowledges the healing power of the gifts, the cubs' actions could be framed as successful medical intervention rather than theft. That's not how this works, Rose said. That's not how any of this works. But even as she said it, she could see the cubs' faces brightening, hope returning to their enormous eyes. They looked at her with such earnest expectation that Rose felt something in her chest twist uncomfortably. Fine, she heard herself say, and immediately wanted to take it back. Fine. The gifts helped. I feel much better. Thank you for your concern. Can we please return Mr. Scales before this becomes a ship-wide incident? Too late. The door opened again. Rose was beginning to think the universe had it out for her specifically, and Captain Gondo entered, his amphibious bulk moving with surprising grace. The Dolathi captain's skin had the faintly damp sheen it always carried, and his huge eyes blinked slowly as he surveyed the assembled chaos. "Rose," he said, his voice carrying the kind of weary patience that suggested he'd dealt with weirder situations but couldn't quite remember when. "My office has received reports from medical, security, engineering, and xenobiology, all concerning you. On a scale of 1 to the plasma core is breaching. How urgent is this situation?" Rose looked at the blankets, at the terrarium, at Rook's recording device, at Krill's judging antennae, and Ondo's datapad, and the Cubs' hopeful faces. "Maybe a 3?" she tried. "Unauthorized removal of biological specimens is classified as a Priority 6 incident," Krill said, because apparently they'd memorized the entire security manual and were determined to share. "So more like a 6, Captain Gondo said. "Rose, this is the 3rd incident this month involving human crew members and cultural misunderstandings." "What were the other 2? Rook asked with interest. "You were involved in both of them." Rook had the grace to look mildly sheepish. "Right. The thing with the food processors and the thing with the—" "We don't need to revisit them," the captain interrupted. "Rose, walk me through what happened." So Rose did, starting with the nap and ending with the current situation, including her ill-advised agreement to pretend the gifts had healed her. The captain listened without interrupting, which was one of the things Rose appreciated about him. The Delathi were known for their patience, and Captain Gondo had enough for the entire ship's crew combined. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "The core issue," he finally said, "appears to be a fundamental gap in cross-cultural understanding. The Moltarii contingent doesn't understand human sleep patterns. The human contingent doesn't understand Moltarii healing traditions. This was bound to cause problems eventually." "So, what do we do about it?" Rose asked. "Well, first, Krill files the required security report, because regulations exist for reasons, and we're not circumventing them." Krill's antennae perked up with satisfaction. "Second, Dr. Yoon is informed that her specimen is safe and being returned. Third, Rose provides a detailed explanation to the Moltari contingent about human biology, preferably before the Cubs decide to help anyone else." "And fourth?" Rose asked, sensing there was more. Captain Gondo's mouth curved in what might have been a smile, though it was hard to tell with Delathi facial features. "Fourth, we all learned something about the importance of comprehensive cultural orientation materials. I'll be having words with the administrative department about the current packet they provide. 6,000 pages is not acceptable if nobody reads them." "What about the Cubs?" Ondo asked. "They were acting from cultural obligation. Surely they shouldn't be punished for trying to save a life?" "Even a life that didn't need saving," Rin added in a small voice. Rose looked down at them. Both Cubs had emerged from behind Ondo, their ears drooping in a way that made her heart clench. They'd been trying to help. They'd been genuinely worried about her. Yes, they'd stolen a specimen and nearly suffocated her with blankets and rocks, but the intention had been pure kindness. "They're not in trouble," Rose said, before the captain could respond. "They made a mistake, but it came from a good place." "Right, Captain." Captain Gondo regarded her with those huge amphibian eyes. "You're volunteering to take responsibility for their actions." "I'm volunteering to make sure this doesn't happen again. I'll do the cultural presentation. I'll explain human sleep to anyone who wants to listen. I'll even coordinate with medical to create a better orientation program. Just don't punish kids for being kind." "Cubs," Ondo murmured. "Cubs. Whatever." The captain was quiet again, and Rose could practically see him weighing options, calculating outcomes, considering the broader implications. Finally he nodded. "Acceptable. Krill, Note in your report that Rose is taking corrective action to prevent future incidents. Ondo, you'll assist her in creating culturally appropriate educational materials for the Moltarii contingent. Rin and Nimbus will participate in the presentation to ensure they understand the differences between human and Moltari biology. The cubs perked up immediately. We can help with a presentation. You will sit quietly and learn, Captain Gondo corrected, though his tone was gentle. Rose has work to do, and you've disrupted her rest period significantly. The least you can do is pay attention when she explains why. Both cubs nodded solemnly, their tails swishing with chastened energy. Now, the captain continued, Rose, return specimen 42G to the lab before Dr. Yoon decides this is grounds for a formal review. Quirrell, file your report. Ondo, collect the thermal blankets and return them to supplies. Rook, I'll delete the recording, Rook said, not sounding at all sincere. You'll archive it in your personal files and never let it see the light of day, Captain Gondo said. Or I'll assign you to scrubbing the waste reclamation filters for a month. Rook's expression suggested he was doing rapid mental calculations about whether the recording was worth that particular punishment. Archived and secured, Captain. My personal eyes only. See that it stays that way. The captain left with the kind of dignified exit that only someone with his experience could manage, leaving the rest of them in awkward silence. Krill departed moments later, already composing their report via neural interface if their glazed expression was any indication, which left Rose holding a terrarium containing an increasingly agitated Mr. Scales, surrounded by thermal blankets, with two very sorry cubs, one overly helpful adult Moltari, and her terrible best friend, who absolutely wasn't going to delete that recording no matter what he'd promised. So, Rook said cheerfully, that could have gone worse. Get out, Rose said. I'm just saying, nobody died, nothing exploded, and you didn't get fired. By our standards, this is practically a success. Rook, get out before I throw a blanket at your head. Leaving. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, you handled that pretty well. The cubs look like they learned something. Rose glanced at Rin and Nimbus, who were indeed watching her with new understanding in their eyes, mixed with lingering concern. We're sorry, Rin said quietly. We didn't mean to make things worse. We just wanted you to feel better, Nimbus added. And there it was, the thing that made it impossible to stay mad at them. They'd been wrong, yes. They'd caused chaos, definitely. But they'd done it because they cared. Because their culture had taught them that when someone was suffering, you didn't stand by and do nothing. Rose set down the terrarium carefully. I know, and I appreciate that you cared enough to try. We just need to make sure you have the right information so you can help in ways that actually help. Deal? Both cubs brightened. Deal! Now, help me carry these blankets back to supplies, and then I need to face Dr. Yoon and explain why her specimen went on an unauthorized field trip. We'll come with you, Rin said immediately. Absolutely not. You've helped enough for one day. Ondo gathered up the thermal blankets with practiced efficiency. I'll escort the cubs back to the Moltarii quarters. Rose, if you need assistance with the educational materials, I'm available to consult. Thanks, Ondo. I'll take you up on that. As they filed out, Rose picked up the terrarium and looked at Mr. Scales, who looked back with an expression that remained deeply unimpressed by recent events. You and me both, Rose told him. Time to face Dr. Yoon, and hope she had a sense of humor about specimen theft motivated by aggressive kindness. She probably didn't, but Rose was going to find out. The walk to the xenobiology lab felt like the longest journey Rose had ever taken, which was saying something given she'd once spent 6 months on a survey mission through an asteroid field. Mr. Scales rattled around in his terrarium with each step, making disgruntled hinge balloon noises that Rose was beginning to interpret as the reptilian equivalent of profound disappointment. "I know," she told him. "I'm disappointed in today, too." The lab doors slid open at her approach, and Rose stepped into the familiar organized chaos of her workspace. Specimen tanks lined the walls, each one containing something strange and wonderful from various corners of the galaxy. Equipment hummed quietly. Data screens flickered with readouts and analysis reports. And standing in the middle of it all, arms crossed, expression somewhere between annoyed and amused, was Dr. Yoon. Dr. Yoon was short, compact, and possessed the kind of energy that suggested she ran on caffeine and sheer determination. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her eyes, currently fixed on Rose with laser focus, missed absolutely nothing. "So," Dr. Yoon said, "my specimen went on an adventure." Rose held up the terrarium like a peace offering. "He's completely unharmed, not a scale out of place. The cubs were very gentle with him." "The cubs," Dr. Yoon repeated, "broke into my lab, bypassed security, stole a specimen, because they thought you were dying." "Technically, they thought I was sick, which is slightly different." "Rose." Rose set the terrarium down on the nearest table with exaggerated care. "Yes, doctor? Explain to me how you managed to cause a ship-wide incident by taking a nap." So Rose explained, again, for what felt like the 100th time that day. The exhaustion, the rest pod, the cubs' cultural misunderstanding about human sleep patterns, the rocks and blankets, and the increasingly desperate attempts to anchor her spirit to the physical world. Dr. Yoon listened without interrupting, though her expression cycled through disbelief, exasperation, and something that might have been reluctant amusement. "Only you," Dr. Yoon said when Rose finished, "only you could turn basic biological necessity into a cross-cultural crisis. In my defense, you don't have a defense. You have an explanation, which is different." Dr. Yoon moved to the terrarium, checking Mr. Scales over with practiced efficiency. "Though I'll admit the cub's cultural response is fascinating from an anthropological perspective. Gift-giving as spiritual anchoring, life-affirming material objects. So you're not mad?" "Oh, I'm definitely mad. My lab was breached. My specimen was removed without authorization. Security protocols failed." Dr. Yoon paused. "But I'm also aware that the cubs genuinely thought they were saving your life, which makes this more complicated than a simple theft." Rose sagged with relief. "Captain Gondo assigned me to create educational materials about human biology for the Moltari contingent. Make sure this doesn't happen again." "Good. Do that. And Rose?" Dr. Yoon looked up from her examination of Mr. Scales. "Maybe also educate them about lab security. I don't want to find out they've liberated anything else because someone looked tired." "Absolutely. No more liberations. Now get out of my lab. You look exhausted, which apparently is a medical emergency around here." Rose left before Dr. Yoon could change her mind about the whole situation, heading back toward her quarters with the vague intention of finally getting some uninterrupted sleep. She made it approximately 20 meters before her communicator chirped. It was Ondo. "Rose, the cubs would like to speak with you before rest cycle. They have something to give you." "Nothing stolen," he added quickly. "They made it themselves." Rose closed her eyes and counted to 10 in 3 different languages. "Fine. Where?" "Moltari Common Area, Deck 6. The Moltari Common Area was designed to accommodate their species' preference for communal spaces with lots of vertical elements and soft surfaces. Hammocks hung at various heights, climbing structures reached toward the ceiling, and the whole space smelled faintly of the particular blend of oils the Moltari used for grooming their dense fur. Rin and Nimbus were waiting near the entrance, practically vibrating with nervous energy. Ondo stood behind them, looking proud in the way adults did when children they cared about were trying to make amends. "Rose!" Nimbus bounced forward. "We made you something. For next time, you practice death." "Practice?" Rose stopped herself. "You mean sleep." "Yes, sleep. We learned about it from Ondo. Humans sleep every day cycle for several hours, and it's normal and healthy and not a medical emergency." Rin recited this like a memorized lesson, which it probably was. "That's exactly right," Rose said, impressed despite herself. "So, we can't bring you rocks and blankets and confused lizards when you sleep," Nimbus continued, "because that would be disruptive and counterproductive to the rest process." "Also correct." "But," Rin said, drawing out the word, "Ondo said we could bring you one gift, if it's something we made ourselves, and it's small and quiet and won't disrupt your rest." Both cubs looked up at her with hopeful eyes, and Rose felt her resistance crumbling like a sandcastle at high tide. "One gift," she agreed. "Something small. That you made." Nimbus produced a small object from their pouch, holding it out with both paws like it was made of glass and moonlight. Rose took it carefully, examining it in the common area's soft lighting. It was a bracelet, woven from what looked like salvaged fiber-optic cables in shades of blue and green and silver. The weaving was intricate, the pattern complex, and it caught the light in ways that made it shimmer like captured starlight. It was, Rose realized with surprise, actually beautiful. "We learned weaving last season cycle," Rin explained. "Ondo taught us. The cables are extras from the engineering department, properly requisitioned," they added quickly. "Not stolen." "It's for protection," Nimbus said. "Not from being sick, because you're not sick, but for good luck? Is that a human thing? Good luck?" "It's definitely a human thing," Rose said, her throat unexpectedly tight. She slipped the bracelet onto her wrist, where it fit perfectly. "It's beautiful. Thank you." The cubs' faces transformed, joy replacing nervousness in an instant. "You like it?" "I love it," Rose said, and meant it. "This is exactly the kind of gift I can use. Something thoughtful and meaningful that won't, suffocate me or cause containment breaches." "We added a note, too." Rin pulled out a small piece of paper, offering it to Rose. The note was written in careful, slightly wobbly, galactic standard. "For when you practice death, stay safe." Rose read it once, twice. Then she started laughing, the kind of laughter that came from exhaustion and relief, and the sheer absurdity of the entire day. "Practice death. I'm stealing that. That's how I'm describing sleep from now on." "Is it wrong?" Nimbus asked, worried. "No, it's perfect. It's the best description of sleep I've ever heard." Rose tucked the note into her pocket. "Thank you both. This means a lot." "We're sorry we made your practice death difficult," Rin said solemnly. "Apology accepted. And I'm sorry I didn't explain human biology better from the beginning. That's my responsibility as the human who's supposed to know things." "You know lots of things," Nimbus assured her. "Ondo says you're one of the smartest humans on the ship." "Ondo is very kind." Rose glanced at the adult Moltari, who nodded in confirmation. "It's true. Your work on the G448 samples was exceptional, which is why you need proper rest to maintain cognitive function." Ondo consulted his datapad. "According to my research, humans require between 6 and 9 hours of sleep per day cycle, preferably in one continuous period. You've had approximately 23 minutes total today." And whose fault is that? Rose asked, but she was smiling. A collaborative failure, Ondo admitted. The Cubs for misunderstanding, myself for enabling them, and you for not establishing clear boundaries about your rest requirements. So what do we do differently next time? Next time, Rin said, we let you practice death in peace. And we leave one small gift, Nimbus added. Something we made. And we don't liberate any specimens, both Cubs said together, clearly having rehearsed this part. Perfect. I think we've all learned something today. Rose stretched, feeling the exhaustion settling back into her bones now that the adrenaline of crisis management was wearing off. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go practice death for the next 8 hours, and if anyone disturbs me, I'm going to be very cranky. We'll tell everyone, Rin promised. Rose is practicing death. Do not disturb. Rose left the Moltari common area with a new bracelet on her wrist, a ridiculous note in her pocket, and a feeling of warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with thermal blankets. The Cubs had made mistakes, yes, but they'd learned from them. They'd tried to make amends in a way that was thoughtful and culturally appropriate. That was more than some adult sapience managed. Her communicator chirped again, Rook, inevitably. How'd it go with Dr. Yoon? I still have a job. Impressive. Drinks later to celebrate your continued employment? After I sleep, 8 hours minimum. I'll let everyone know you're practicing death. You heard about that already? The Cubs are very enthusiastic about their new vocabulary. It's spreading through the ship like wildfire. Rose could hear the grin in his voice. By tomorrow morning, half the crew will be describing sleep as practicing death. I've made my mark on galactic culture. That you have. Sleep well, Rose. Try not to cause any more incidents. No promises. Rose made it back to the rest area, the same rest pod, because she was nothing if not stubborn, and settled in once more. The bracelet glinted on her wrist, catching the soft lighting. Outside, she could hear the usual sounds of a ship at normal operations. No alarms, no crises, no well-meaning Cubs preparing to smother her with kindness. She closed her eyes. This time, she slept for 9 uninterrupted hours, and when she woke, she found exactly one gift waiting for her. A small carved figure of a human, clearly made by inexperienced paws, lying peacefully in a rest pod. The Cubs had been practicing their art skills. Rose kept it on her desk for the rest of her time aboard the distant horizon, a reminder that sometimes the worst disasters made the best stories, and that being aggressively loved by otter children from space was, all things considered, a pretty good problem to have.